Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and delighted to have back with us our good friend, Dr. Alex McFarland. He's the director of the Christian Worldview and Apologetics at the Christian Worldview Center there in North Greenville University in Greenville, South Carolina. He's a talk show host and a regular guest here on theDove, and we are delighted to have him with us today. We only have him for a few moments because he's on a tight schedule, and we want to talk to him about the whole big publicity thing around Bruce Jenner becoming Caitlyn Jenner, which is just unbelievable. So, Dr. McFarland, good to see you, buddy. How you doing, friend?
Great. It's great to be back. Thank you for having me, Perry.
You bet. So what's your take on this?
Well, you know, my take on all of this, not only with Bruce Jenner, but with the whole blurring of gender lines, is that it's demonic. It is the ultimate form of moral relativism because it's people saying, God, you have no claim on me, not even over my gender. I think it's evil.
Doctor, we just found an article that came out earlier today. Dr. Paul McHugh, who is the psychiatrist in chief at Johns Hopkins Hospital, he said it's a mental disorder.
Well, you know, really, while 40 years plus of the gay agenda has really skewed people's perspectives, right now, most Americans believe, roughly 60% of Americans believe that 23% of the population is gay, and 51% of Americans believe that sexual orientation is something you're born with, not the product of environment. The statistics really show that that is not the case. About 3% of the population will ever struggle with same-sex attraction, and a smaller number will act on that. And there are parts of the population that struggle with gender identity, and invariably, and I know this not only as 24 years of being a pastor and a minister, but also graduate training. I have a minor in developmental psychology from Liberty University, that the same-sex attraction and gender confusion, these sorts of struggles with gender and sexuality and identity are due to emotional and physical wounds. In other words, my heart goes out to a Bruce Jenner because this is a person who's been hurt. And the answer is not to indulge in the deviant behavior and even, you know, gender reassignment, sex change surgery, because the suicide rate is very high among these people. I think this doctor from Johns Hopkins is being very responsible when he says, look, this is not good for the patient. You know, Bruce Jenner said on CNN that he has the soul of a woman, but here's a man who has fathered 6 children. If you can marry 3 women, father 6 children, you're not a female. Genetically, he's a male. Genetically, females are females. And it's very sad that our culture has bought into a lie that not only is damaging to people, families, relationships, but really it's saying to God, God, you don't have any claim on my life, not even over my gender. This is dark. It really is.
You know, we're already seeing responses from various Christians and Christian leaders who have, I don't know if they know what they're doing, but they're already calling Bruce Jenner she. And so, I mean, hello, where do we wave the flag here, Alex?
Well, they did this with Chastity Bono, the daughter of Sonny and Cher, and Chastity now calls herself Chaz Bono. And instantly, periodicals and journalists were referring she and her. And this is wrong. This is wrong. Our culture, and I don't think people are really aware of the ramifications of this, our culture is heading towards societal chaos because of our abandonment in belief in moral law, that there are some moral boundaries, there are some things that are right, there are some things that are wrong. Our founding fathers built this nation, liberated from the British, and wrote our Declaration, our Constitution, believing in moral law. John Adams, our second president, said that this Constitution is suitable only for a moral and religious people. And I got to say, when clergy give tacit approval to the gay agenda, the transsexual agenda, they not only are going against the Word of God, they're undermining the very moral foundation on which our law, our judiciary, our Constitution sits. Now, what we've got to do for people like Bruce Jenner that are horribly, tragically confused, that are hurting, there have been wounds, lack of bonding with the parent of the same sex, early childhood molestation. These are the things that contribute to this. What we've got to do is lovingly say, God has a better way. Jesus Christ not only saves our soul, he heals our life. The Bible says in Joel chapter 2, verse 25, that God restores the years the locust has eaten. But the worst thing that we could do, the thing that does not honor God, is not loving to our neighbor, is to acquiesce and go along with the gay transsexual agenda. It's disastrous. And as Christians, we're called to uphold truth and light. And just going with the flow doesn't do that.
Alex, I know you got to go. One quick question. Do you think the church is losing its moral authority in the culture?
I do think that is so for a couple of reasons. Bill O'Reilly was right 2 weeks ago when he said that preachers are not speaking out because they're afraid. We're losing our moral authority because we've abdicated our prophetic role and we're not speaking truth. And then when you've got Christians behaving badly, you've got people that are on a moral high horse, but they're living sinful lives. They're talking it, but they're not walking it. That destroys our credibility in the eyes of people. So we have to speak truth, and we've got to live truth. And with the help of the Lord and prayer and consistency, maybe God will, in his mercy, allow us to resume some semblance of credibility in the eyes of a lost world.
All right. Alex, thanks for squeezing us in. I know you got a very tight schedule. We value it greatly. So thanks for squeezing us in your day. Best to your friend. Look forward to having you back soon and longer.
God bless you. God bless theDove.
Okay. Thank you, buddy. All right. We'll take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll continue our conversation on this with our panel in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Paulina and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Okay, welcome back, and I have in the studio with us Steve Johnson, Polina Leiser, and we want to kind of continue on with our quick conversation we had with Dr. Alex McFarland, and who's an apologist. You know what's interesting? He said something. He came right out and said it. This whole thing is demonic. It is an attempt for Satan to neutralize gender identity or biblical gender identity. We quoted earlier the article from the psychiatrist in chief at Johns Hopkins Hospital, Dr. Paul McHugh, and he is going on to say that this is a mental disorder, and those who actually go through with all of the surgery and everything have a 20 times higher rate of suicide.
Yeah, I knew that it was high. I didn't realize it was that high. That's high. That's alarming.
So, and others will tell you, that people that I've had on the air, that will say that the whole issue of homosexuality stems from some kind of a trauma early on in life. Now, that could have been a result of an abuse, a physical abuse, certainly an emotional abuse. But there is no medical community out there saying that any of this is natural. And now when you have a leading psychiatrist coming out and making a statement, which I'm glad he's done this, because you wonder now if the rest of the psychological community is going to support them.
Yeah, it will be fascinating because they've been pretty quiet, I think, for the most part. You know, the concern I have is this. There are so many levels that you will see people talking about it, because those people who are applauding this will do so at all cost and use whatever justification they can. So in other words, let me give you an example. If you find, let's say, a qualified individual who happens to have been reported by Fox News, they'll say, well, that's just Fox News giving it a slant. Okay, so right there, they're trying to change the discussion as opposed to looking at the evidence. The other is this. If you start talking about saying, well, this is against God, which I think a lot of us would agree with that. The difficulty with that argument is that somebody will say, well, I don't believe in your God, so now it's okay. No, that's not really the conclusion, but do you see how it diffuses the discussion? This is why I think to have a conversation that is helpful needs to really be thought out, because you're going to find yourself in quicksand saying, well, I didn't really say what I wanted to say, or I said it and they took it a different way. This is going to be difficult, and I don't think it's going to be easy at all.
All right, Polina, do you think political correctness is intimidating those of us who have a biblical moral worldview from speaking out?
Yes, and I think we just don't know what to do. I think as Christians, we don't know how to handle the issue, just like homosexuality. And we feel like there's a separation. If you're homosexual, you can't be Christian. If you're transgender, you can't be Christian. And Bruce Jenner identified himself as a Republican and as a Christian. So how do we deal with that as a church? And I think going back to the psychiatrist who said that it's a mental illness, I think it's great that he said it, because now we have to realize that with so many suicides and with the surgery only masking the underlying problem, all these people need our help. And so the church needs to be accepting of people like that so that they feel safe. We don't have to agree with them and we don't have to accept what they did. But I think somehow, somewhere, we have to find a way for those people to feel safe in church and be able to deal with those underlying problems so that they can eventually deal with what's on the surface.
Well, and I think she points to a good aspect, that to do that, you have to have a dialogue. You have to have a discussion. You have to have somebody. I'm sorry, pastors are going to have to stand up. I don't know how you'll be able to be neutral in this issue. I think we've come to a point now where something's going to have to be, the line in the sand is there, and you're going to have to make a statement to say, if I believe one way or the other, and because of that, some sort of a resolve has to be in place. And I think those pastors can't assume, as we talked earlier, that the people in their church are sitting there understanding what the issue really is.
The danger that's popping up now is, and I think, Polina, you hit on it, we got to figure out a way to say the church is a safe place for you to come to. But are we saying that you can identify yourself as a Christian without changing your life? And so you invite them in, but if they don't change, if there isn't that change because you've had an encounter with Christ, then what are we doing here?
But the change happens if we say that, we're going to be so hypocritical, because there are so many sinners in the church who have not changed yet, but they're in the process. And they may be changed until the moment they face Christ and, they're dead. So with the transsexual people, we can be like, okay, you guys have to change before you come in, while everybody else is changing in the process.
All right.
Yeah, yes, totally, yeah.
Yeah, all right. So we invite them in because we want them to experience the love of God.
Just like anybody.
Okay.
Because
anybody.
they are anybody, yeah. We all have problems.
So we all have, and I don't mean to categorize them because the church is full of sick people. You come to church because your life's messed up. But the risk is, do we go too far? Case in point, a church that I know in California has kind of got themselves in a sticky wicket because they allowed for a gay couple to sing in the choir, while at the same time a couple that's living together can't sing in the choir. What are we doing to ourselves?
No, I agree. Well, look, these are man-made rules. This has nothing to do with who God is and the relationship with Him. So, yeah, they have to deal with that. And I think that's a good point. Have we put in some sort of weird requirements that allow you to do something or nothing? Look, if you have, and let me just finish that, without any kind of really religious resolve to it all. If you have somebody who is in need of care, you need to give them care before you enable them into another capacity. That's what I would say. I mean, it could be anything. It could be anybody with any kind of a known sin that needs to be resolved. We are all sinners. I think that what Christ has done for us, if we accept it, we're on the road to having that relationship with Him. If we continue in that sin, that's a problem. You wouldn't enable that person then. I would say, just like what you're talking about, you don't enable it and you don't make weird exceptions.
And it's that hypocrisy that those in the gay community will throw back at the church.
Sure.
Saying, your church is full of sinners and you haven't even fixed them, so why are you telling me how to live?
Yeah.
You're not even calling their sin sin, but you're calling my lifestyle sin.
Like I say, this
Yeah.
is. I think this is a singular point where we have to start looking at everything we do. Plus, pastors are going to have to come out and talk about the situation as it is and where Christians stand on that.
And be honest about it.
Yes,
if it's
an
a sin,
open
it's
discussion.
a sin. Doesn't mean you tell the person, go and deal with it yourself, but you have to call things the way they are. And another thing is, I lost my thought. Let me think about it.
While you were saying that, you know what this reminded me of? This isn't some category to say this is anything like politics or anything like that.
No.
This isn't. We are beyond any of those marginalized discussions that might be going on. We're talking about the essence of the faith and what we believe. It reminds me of the Catholic Church where Nancy Pelosi, for example, said, well, she's Catholic, but she believes in abortion. And the Catholic archbishops and so on were saying, well, you do realize to be what we determine to be a Catholic, you cannot be in favor of abortion. I mean, that is the stance of the church. Now, I'm just using that as an example. I'm not endorsing it or denying it or whatever. But that caused some of those who were like Nancy Pelosi or others to have to now make an evaluative process. You just can't be everything without a commitment to what the essence of that belief is.
Okay, because I think that what Dr. McFarland said there is that those who have same-sex attraction in this country, most people will think it's probably up around 40–50%. He's saying it's actually about 3%.
I've heard it's even lower than that because
but
of
those
how
who
they've been
act upon
calculated.
it, those who act upon it, bring the number down to just right around 1%.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
right.
so why are we as Christians being intimidated to not say anything about this particular issue? Because the rhetoric that I hear among Christianity is that we've already accepted him as a person who has a same-sex attraction. We're already calling Bruce Jenner a she. We've already jumped over the line in trying to find some kind of safe place so that we can have the dialogue, while at the same time we're capitulating to the problem.
Well, I think what's happened, because the church in general, and I mean I'm including myself in it, has not had a point of reference to say, here's what we believe and why we believe it in these instances, that you've had a situation take control instead of the church say, we kind of, this is nothing new, it's happened in the Old Testament, we can point to it all, and this is what we believe and why we believe it. I'm sorry, but I'm just not seeing those leaders, except like Alex McFarland, come out and say that, because this is nothing new. We've seen this problem before.
Polina, do you think we've lost the fear of God in Christianity? In other words, if the church is full of people who have a closet full of sin after they have supposedly been converted, and we're all sinners, we do it every day. But if we're not calling sin sin, and we're not calling that we don't have a fear of God, so to speak, to change, then anything goes. We're going to allow anybody in. Yeah, it's a safe place. Come on in. You can be a part of us, and which is great. I understand that, and a lot of churches are going to preach grace, and we should do that too. But are we seeing the conversion and the change into a new life?
I think you answered your own question, and I do believe that, and the reason why we're losing that fear of God in the way, because there is no accountability in the church. I come from the tradition where we do have confession, and traditionally it is, you confess one to another, and you confess to God in front of, in my case it would be a priest, but he represents the church. And so in a way I voice my sins. I'm accountable to God, but also I know that it's not just, because it's so easy to make deals with God when it's just you and him.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have done that, and maybe even, Bruce Jenner, I'm sure he's confessed whatever, I'm not sure, but I'm assuming whatever is in his heart, and he probably somehow figured it out that it's okay. What would it be like if he was actually in a situation, whether it's a one-on-one counseling or a group thing, whatever it is that the church implements, whatever denomination you're from, where you would have that kind of accountability? I guess I'm just thinking of practical things we can do if they're already not in place.
Well, and I was just going to say this feeds into a little bit of what you were saying, Perry, is that when somebody comes into the church, you welcome them in, but then there's a mentoring aspect. There's also that aspect where you are working with them. You don't just leave them to be. This is where the shepherding comes into play. And I think that's important. I think churches have to do this.
Well, I think the societal pressure on the church to shut up which includes, in particular, this issue. And by being forced to shut up, we're also shut up on every other sin that's out there. And so we'll just preach a happy message. We'll preach a God loves you and blesses you message without change.
Yeah.
So the born again experience is watered down to just a verbal confession, not an actual transformation. And it somewhat bothers me. But if the psychological community, now this guy's not representing the church, he's representing the psychological community, is saying, wait a minute, this is not normal, this is a mental disorder. This could rock the world of this whole issue if this sees the light of day. You know, so
I think in the meantime, we as Christians and pastors are going to have to decide how to respond. I don't think no response is an appropriate response. You know, you think of the prophets in the Old Testament and how they were called upon to, this is a time to say what's in the Scripture and just reflect on that. I think we have to do that. And the pressure is going to be on, I think, pastors and church leaders on this. And all of us, really.
And I think, well, personally, when I think about those issues, whether it's abortion, homosexuality, transgenders, I always ask myself, did God make a mistake? Did he accidentally, you know, just kind of looked away and you were born the wrong gender? And when you think about that and you realize that maybe, you know, I guess I'm thinking, how do you talk to those people? It's your cross to bear. That's what you talk.
He saw you before you were even conceived.
You know,
in your mother's
how do you
womb,
deal with
know?
the special needs kids? You know, it's a tragedy and it's a cross that you bear for the rest of your life. But that's something that you were appointed by God to do.
I do think this whole issue goes back to something I've said earlier, and that is the church is going to have to take responsibility for sex education. We shouldn't just abandon that issue and give it to the public school.
Yeah.
I think the church is going to have to come back to this issue, take on sex education, deal with youth pastors and parents, and begin to deal with biblical gender identity. What it means biblically to be a male, what it means biblically to be a female. But when we kind of just threw up our hands on that because we considered anything sexual to be dirty, we gave it to the public school system, and now the public school system wants to take your kids at any age and take them to an adult bookstore and call that sex education. Yeah.
And I don't know how much time we have left, but I want to share something. Alex mentioned suicides. We talked about suicides. I had that experience in my family. Close friends of ours had a son born who later said that he's a girl. He's always felt like he was a girl. He was a little older than me. And parents had resources, so they helped him, you know, as any parent would, try to make the child happy. So they helped the boy do the surgery and help him throughout his life. He later moved to the United States where he felt the freedom was more accompanying to his desires. She committed suicide 2 years ago. And
Well,
I just know that it's tragic for family. And so it's hard to talk about it because I know firsthand how tragic it is for his mom and for his dad to deal with this.
Sure.
And yet I know that he was so alone and there was no one who was brave enough to talk to him, who was even kind enough to love him.
See, and I think this is the response the church has to come with on so many levels, including that one there. Yeah.
He went on to say, Dr. McHugh from Johns Hopkins Hospital, he goes on to say, listen to this is absolutely stunning, that after a Vanderbilt University in London clinic, children who had expressed transgender feelings, but for whom over time 70 to 80% spontaneously lost those feelings. So in time, as they get older, they come out of it. And I have seen this. This is why in same-sex marriages, you are seeing the divorce rate to be as high as anything else, and you're seeing the singleness rate at older age to be high as anything else. So anyway, we're not going to solve it all in one day, but interesting, and we'll keep on it. Thank you both for coming in. Coming up next, I think you're going to really enjoy our time together with Kevin Palau. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, theDove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Okay, welcome back, and what a delight for us today to just kind of go up the road a little bit to Portland and check in with Kevin Palau. He is the president of the Luis Palau Association, and he's authored a book called Unlikely, and what they did in Portland could be a model for many cities around the country. So we want to talk to you about that. Hi, Kevin. How you doing, my friend? Good to see you.
I'm doing well, Perry.
Hey, thanks for giving us some time. Well, fascinating story. What made you guys do this? And give us the story.
Well, Dad, for people that know anything about us, and I suppose, some people do, some don't, Dad is this wonderful Argentine evangelist who met Patricia Schofield, a native Oregonian, up at Multnomah School of the Bible 55 years ago or so. And so our heart is always to try to get the gospel out. So everything we do, if you dig deep enough, it's going to always come down to how do we communicate this timeless good news to a changing world. And so, we've been based in Portland for decades. And again, most people, if they know much about Portland at all, they know it's a very quirky place. It's a very liberal place, a very proudly progressive place, as our city leaders would say. And so, it really came out of this desire to communicate the good news. So, Portland was a place where we experimented and tried some new things. Portland was a place where we had our first festivals, where we went from kind of the traditional Billy Graham crusade model to an outdoor music festival. And building on that, we had about 100 pastors together in 2007. And we said, what more could we do to try to build a good foundation relationally for the gospel? And so, we did something that wasn't that rocket science-y, I guess you'd say. It was kind of fairly obvious, but we'd never done it. We went to see the mayor and said, you know what, we don't want to be known primarily for being against things. We obviously can't agree with the city and folks on everything, but we want to be known primarily for what we're for and not what we're against. So if we could mobilize 15,000 Jesus followers to serve the city, what could we do? And so that led to what's now called City Serve, where hundreds of churches and tens of thousands of Christians in the Portland area actively work together to meet the needs of public schools, kids in foster care, et cetera, all to obey the Lord, love our neighbor as ourselves, but also to kind of get rid of some of the negative stereotypes that keep some people from hearing the gospel.
Wow. Let's unpack this. You obviously needed to get a base of pastors together with this idea in mind. You were going to serve a community that almost diabolical to their belief system.
Yeah, right.
How did you pull these pastors together?
In our case, it was funny. It was a God thing because we'd gotten the pastors together in the year 2000 for a big Palau festival. So trust had been built among a lot of the pastors to say, you know what, hey, in 2000, we gathered more than 50,000 people in Waterfront Park, right in the heart of downtown Portland, to share the good news, to have a fun, family-friendly, evangelistic outreach with bands like DC Talk. I think it was DC Talk then in those days, yeah. And Skillet and Kirk Franklin, et cetera. So, you know what, it's been a while since we've gotten together to share the gospel. Let's do that again. So we had this history of trust that had been built up among a lot of the pastors, and and the Palau Association were based in Portland. So over the years, trust had been built, and the idea then was, could we not simply have a big evangelistic event, as important as that is? Could we have a more sustainable effort? Could we work together year after year after year, in addition to having the occasional big catalytic events? So trust was built, like it almost always is, relationally, lots of cups of coffee and lots of sitting down with people and building trust and getting the pastors together. We have annual pastors barbecues with them and their families. We do various things to try to say, or try to remind us, you know what? We may worship in slightly different ways. We may baptize in slightly different ways. But at the core, we're all united by our love for people and our love for Jesus Christ and our desire to communicate the good news. So Portland, thankfully, has a good history of unity that's been built up. I'd say part of it is because we aren't kidding ourselves. We know that Portland is a tough place for the gospel, and we need each other. That's wonderful. All right, tell me about your first meeting with the mayor on the whole idea. Yeah, that was an interesting one, because this is now Charlie Hales is actually the third Portland mayor that we've worked with in this process. So it began with Tom Potter, former police chief who was mayor, and Sam Adams, who at the time was a city commissioner and then mayor-elect in the beginning of the process. And then from 2008 to 2012, he really, during his term as mayor, he was very supportive of this effort. And I think what made it a little interesting for people was Sam Adams, and people, may know this, it was the first openly gay mayor of a top 20 city in the country. So that, the first meetings, it came, I think, with a little bit of fear and trepidation on both sides. From his side, it was, really? The evangelical community that I frankly associate with hating my community, they want to meet with me? I wonder what it's about. Are they here to kind of jump down my throat and express anger? Wow. So, there was a need for trust on both sides. We wanted to make it clear, look, we're not pretending that we're in agreement on everything. And in fact, there's a number of areas where we would clearly disagree, but we love you in the name of the Lord. You're our mayor, and we're commanded to pray for you, and we love you like we're supposed to love everybody. So trust was built as we said, you know what, we're not going to agree on everything, so let's not accentuate that. Let's disagree respectfully out of friendship, and then let's not let that stop us from working together on the things we do agree on. We want to see public schools in Portland thriving. We want to see kids in foster care better cared for. So the church had a chance to say, you know what, even when we disagree, we love you. And I think that was a message that was a little surprising for people, sad to say. Well, so given that conversation, did you point out a particular need with the mayor that you folks wanted to address? Well, you know what, it's funny. We really went in with a humble attitude saying, you know what, we're not the experts. The church, even though the churches, are very much in the trenches serving, we said, let's go humbly. Hey, Mayor, you know what? We're a little embarrassed that we haven't been working more actively with the city. And so we're here not to kind of pontificate and pretend we know better, but to simply say, if we could mobilize thousands of folks from our churches to serve, what would you have us do? How could we make life better? Brilliant. So really it was a humble asking. We're not coming with an agenda. How can we serve? So once the mayor kind of said, really? Okay. The areas that were pointed out were pretty obvious ones. They're probably the obvious ones that most of those watching right now would say, okay, well, I get that. Hunger, homelessness, public education. I mean, Sam Adams came in as a mayor with a real focus on education. And, at the time, only about 55% of high school students in Portland public schools were graduating on time, which is really it's a shame. It's an embarrassment for the city, and it's not good. And so there was a real emphasis. I'd say the one that really took off was churches coming alongside public schools. I'll give you one example that continues to resonate around the country, and it's talked about in this book that I just finished, or just was published this week, called Unlikely, that tells this unlikely story of evangelical Christians working with a very progressive city and even a progressive mayor who was a member of the gay and lesbian community. So Roosevelt High School was identified by our superintendent, Carol Smith, as the neediest high school in Portland public schools. It had been built in 1922 for 2,000 students. And by the time 2008 came around, there were only 450 students left. Mm-hmm. So that meant that everyone that could have gotten their child out of Roosevelt had done it. There was no football team that could play on campus because the grandstands had been condemned. It was a very discouraging environment. So in this setting of CityServe, taking place, a church called Southlake, a Foursquare church, came along and said, we're looking for a way to be part of this. How can we serve? And so we said, well, the superintendent and mayor said Roosevelt High School has some needs. So what began with them doing a tremendous one-day makeover, 1,000 people from that church showed up in a very well-planned way and did a great job doing the kinds of things you can do in one day.
Wow.
Some painting and cleaning and weeding and putting down bark dust. If that's all that would have happened, praise the Lord, it would have been a big difference. It would have made a difference. But the remarkable thing was that the folks from Southlake fell in love with that community. They humbly realized that they had a lot to gain as well from just building these relationships. And so the folks from Southlake kept showing up week after week, month after month, volunteering in a variety of ways. And finally, the principal, Charlene, said to Christine, who was the outreach pastor of the church, you're here every day with folks from the church anyway, why don't you office here? And so now for 5 years, Southlake has had staff from the church officing at Roosevelt High School, and they now run the clothing closet, the food pantry. They help with the Head Start program. Neil Lomax, former NFL quarterback who's a member of the church, and the head of the NFL for Nike, who's a member of the church, got Nike involved. They rebuilt the track and the grandstands. Neil is the offensive coordinator for the football team now. So it's been a revolution at Roosevelt. And their graduation rate climbed 15 percentage points as they've been mentoring kids in the freshman class. They've doubled the number of students in the last 5 years. So that led the superintendent to come and say, if that's what you're talking about, would you please find us a church partner for every school in Portland Public Schools? So now there are now 300 churches that are partnering with public schools in 16 different school districts.
Oh, what a story. That's terrific. Kevin, let me take a quick break. We'll come back, and maybe you can kind of sparse other people to think about City Serve in their community. And the book is entitled Unlikely. You may want to check it out. It is put out by Howard's Books, which is a division of Simon & Schuster. And it's available in the bookstores, Amazon, online. Check it out. We'll be right back with Kevin Palau in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Daniel, and I work at theDove TV. Compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market. But at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Hi, welcome back, and what a delight to have with us today Kevin Palau. He is the president of the Luis Palau Association up in Portland. He's authored a book called Unlikely, and I think you need to get this book and read it. First of all, it'll inspire you. Secondly, I think it almost becomes a manual of what you can do in your community as well. And it is pretty inspiring what they have done up in the Portland area. By the way, you can go to Palau, that's PALAU.org is the website. I will say this, Kevin. I know in Grants Pass they have the concerned families that they call it Serve Grants Pass, where the community has come out and done it. Here in the Medford area, I know of one church. There may be others, but the Nazarene Church has adopted a school here. In fact, ironically enough, it's Roosevelt School, and they deal with some students. So this whole thing has really got legs, and I've heard some testimonies of teachers, administrators, principals. Their head kind of goes on tilt that the community would be there with really no agenda other than the serving. So it really has an impact.
You're right. I think at the beginning in Portland, there was a sense of, can we trust these churches? They must have some agenda. It's sad that we live in a suspicious society. Mm-hmm. There's so much polarization, and in some cases with understandable reasons. The Christian community, we may feel a bit put down. We feel like we've got to kind of stand up for what we believe, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we've always got to be careful in how we come across. It's possible to disagree, but with genuine respect, listening more than we speak, not doing things with anger. And so, in Portland, this whole thing, of partnering with schools and also jumping in with both feet into the foster care system was genuinely out of a concern that, you know what, we've kind of been painted into this corner that we're only angry and frustrated and defensive.
Right.
You know what? That's not a great way to win people over to what we believe, especially about the good news of Jesus Christ, is if we're disagreeable to be around, as obvious as that is.
Right.
So, we found, hey, if we're simply obedient to the call of Christ to love our neighbor as ourselves, God is going to open doors for us to open our mouths and share the most important message we can ever share, which is, you know what? My life was changed by an encounter with Jesus Christ, and I would love to tell you about that. And so it's not that we're ashamed of the gospel. It's not that sharing the gospel didn't work, so let's just go and humbly serve people, and maybe they'll ask us. It's a combination of the two. Yeah. It's genuinely loving people and looking and praying for opportunities to share the good news. So we haven't had to hide the gospel at all as we've been sharing and serving with city leaders.
All right. It's called City Serve. By the way, the mayor's response after you had your encounter with the school, what was his take on it?
Well, Sam, and this is old enough, history now that people may have forgotten, but when Sam Adams, who's become a genuine friend, he did the foreword to the book, which probably, which surprised people a bit. Here you've got this book by this, son of evangelist Luis Palau, president of this evangelistic organization, with a foreword by the first openly gay mayor of a top 20 city. What's that about? Mm-hmm. And so again, it's not that there was compromise. It just shows that Sam's attitude has so turned around toward the Christian community, a group that he had identified with. I mean, I hate to say this, but he didn't, had no other way to think of it than these evangelicals hate me and my community. Why would I spend time with them? Now to have him doing the foreword of the book, it's because he realized that nobody loves Portland like the Christian community. There was a lot of misunderstanding that had been kind of tossed around. Sometimes it's the media, that paint us into a corner, and sometimes it's the way we come across. But in Sam's case, he had a crisis in his life. Some of you may remember this. I'm not going to go into all the details, but he'd made a very bad mistake. He'd done something totally wrong. He would admit that himself. And in the midst of that scandal, when a lot of people, even a lot of his friends, kind of turned on him, the Christian community came alongside and didn't condone what he'd done in the slightest, but said, you know what, it doesn't change how we feel about you. Jesus Christ is full of love and grace and is open to forgiving any of us. And so Dad spent a couple hours with Sam in this time of personal crisis and was able to share the good news with him. And I think, the way that the Christian community responded in humility and grace to him in his time of need really softened his heart. And now he's publicly spoken with me at a lot of large evangelical gatherings saying, you know what? I had a lot of misinformation about the Christian community, and I realize now that the Christian community absolutely loves the broader community. And even when we disagree, we can do it respectfully. So, I long to see that attitude take hold in our country overall. Wouldn't it be great if Democrats and Republicans could disagree, but with a little more grace and respect, and things didn't devolve into the name calling that just doesn't help anybody?
I always said, in fact, I said it earlier in the show, there's 3 stages we go through. The first one is shock and awe. The next one is anger and blame. And unfortunately, most of us stay there. But if we move on, we'll go on to the next stage, which is taking personal responsibility. So I want to commend you on what you're doing here, because this is the model that I think a lot of people are looking for. And you never know. You just don't know when Sam will remember his time with your dad and you and all the churches working together. You don't know when that seed is going to pop up out of the ground.
We all know that instinctively with our own family, friends, with anybody. All we can do is plant the seed. We're not the person that can. We wish sometimes we could force that seed to sprout, don't we? We wish we could just, by sheer grit and determination, because we've experienced the joy of the gospel. We've experienced the life-transforming nature of humbly repenting, turning to Christ. We see it as nothing but a good thing. It's good news. So if we could just, grab everyone we know and help them see it, we would. The reality is everyone's got their own decision to make. And we see it especially, of course, in our own families, sometimes with our own kids or grandkids. And so to be able to sometimes take a deep breath, trust the Lord, keep praying like crazy, look for opportunities to keep watering that seed. But, to have that calm confidence that God's in control. One of the things we've seen that's really changed in Portland as the churches have been loving and serving, I'd say there's a greater confidence in the gospel on the part of thousands of Jesus followers in Portland. There's a sense of confidence. You know what? We're one body. Doesn't matter what the label is in our church. If we love Jesus Christ, if we trust God's word, we're part of one community. Let's live that way. There's a confidence that comes from saying, you know what, we're not the pariahs of Portland anymore. We've built up trust and respect with the mayor's office, with our city and county commissioners, with school superintendents. We had a gathering just last week with 80 principals from Portland Public Schools and 100 pastors at the invitation of the school superintendent to get to know each other and to build relationships between pastors and principals. How does that happen? It happens when we act as we should and love and serve people even that we disagree with, not being afraid that we're compromising. You know what? Our light will shine. We don't have to compromise, but we do have to listen, love and find common ground with people, and God will open the door for us to share the good news.
Wow. I only got a couple of minutes left, Kevin, but let me ask you this. What's the biggest message you want people to take away from your book?
I guess I would say is don't get angry and don't get discouraged, because I think those are two things that we can really tend to feel as we look at the direction that the country's going. Some of us, maybe we remember what feels like the good old days, and it can be frightening, which can tempt us to be kind of hunker down and kind of, be insular and focus everything just on our community, kind of sit in our church and kind of, say, well, Jesus is going to come back soon, Lord willing, or, eventually I'll go be in heaven. That's not what God's called us to do. We're called to seek the peace and prosperity of this city or community that God's brought you to. Don't be afraid and don't be angry. Don't be angry at people that disagree with you. Jesus clearly modeled for us, we're supposed to love our enemies. We're supposed to turn the other cheek. It doesn't mean that we don't express lovingly and kindly what we believe, but it means that anger is not the way of the follower of Christ. So don't be angry and defensive. Don't be afraid. Be joyfully bold in living out your faith, which in a lot of cases starts with humbly serving. Go to your school principal nearby, maybe with some people from your church, or better yet, get a little group of churches together and find some simple ways that you can let your light shine by loving and serving, and pray then for opportunities to answer that question. Why are you doing this? Because Jesus Christ has changed my life, and the open doors can be there. And so, it's not rocket science. It's pretty obvious. It's a biblical way to live. But if it can happen in Portland, Oregon, in kind of quirky, crazy Portlandia, where 8,000 people ride their bikes naked through the streets, it can probably happen anywhere.
What an inspiration. All right, the book is entitled Unlikely, and it got put out by Howard Books. There's a picture of it on the screen for those watching on the Dove TV. Check it out. Get it. It's a manual, it's an inspiration, and it's a model of what can be done. Hey, Kevin, you're a delight. Let's connect more often, okay?
That'd be great. And you know what? Hey, we're doing the biggest effort in our history in New York City, July 11th, Central Park.
Whoa.
This same thing's happening in New York City, where churches are serving. So anyway, we'd love it.
We'll be praying for you guys.
Thanks.
Best to you and your dad and your family, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right, blessings. All right, we'll see you next time on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Jim and I work at the Dove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, theDove.us.